What's up, ladies? Coach Shauna here. I am going to go over how I create macros for my clients and how you can create some macros for yourself and how we understand our needs day to day based off of all kinds of variables like age, training, activity level, our body composition goals, traveling, all kinds of stuff like that. So I call it macro flexibility because that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It is being comfortable day to day with a macronutrient range versus this exact number that we have to hit every day, regardless of what's happening. So when I'm looking at someone's macro needs, I always have a baseline that I require them to get no matter what. And one of the reasons I really like having a minimum or a baseline is it automatically starts to take away that restrictive feeling or I can't have or, I have to stop eating or something like that. If I set you minimums and some nice high minimums, not, 500 grams of carbs a day, but a realistic amount of protein. I like my athletes to almost always be getting 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 125 pounds, you're getting 125 grams. If you're weighing 185 pounds, you're getting 185 grams. Now, I will put a caveat to that. If I have a bigger athlete, someone over 200 pounds, then we're going to be realistic, right? I don't want any female athlete to have to be trying to get in 200, 250 grams of protein a day. Then she's going to be stuffed to the gills and not comfortable. But the gram per pound is a general starting point. If you have questions about this as you're watching this, you are welcome to find me on all the different platforms, especially if you are a bigger athlete, to ask, okay, what am I supposed to do if I, am over 200 pounds? But generally speaking, up to about 200, I want you gram per pound. After that, I want you having a minimum amount of carbohydrates. Now, again, caveat, right? Nutrition is not black and white. It's an art instead of a science. But there are some general rules. We're painting on an easel, as I like to say, or a palette, as I like to say, right? And if you put too much paint on, then it goes everywhere. If you don't put enough paint on, then it doesn't cover your palette the way you want to. So with these rules, with our carbohydrates, I want you at this starting point or this minimum if we're not in an intentional deficit or cut. If we're in a cut, then things are going to change. But even then, we're going to have you hitting a minimum number. Maybe it's less carbs. We're always going to have you shooting for a minimum. And then fats across the board. I never have one of my female athletes, even if we are in a cut or deficit, go below 60 grams of fat a day. Dietary fat is super important for us to make our female sex hormones. It's super important to have a nice supply of energy when we don't have carbs. And it's great for satiety. Plus, it's just not reasonable to ask someone to go super low fat and then also have you hit a high protein number, right? I want you to have dietary fat and a decent amount because it's very, very important. So we're hitting these minimums. After we decide what our minimums are going to look like, we talk about what our carb intake should look like. And we're not afraid of carbs at this point, right? Because we realize that as a woman, we need a certain amount of carbohydrates, especially if we're female CrossFitters or weightlifters. And how many grams of carbs do I need? So I want you to have a general rule of I need about I have that baseline of 100 to 125 grams, right? No matter what, presuming I'm not intentionally cutting. And then from there, I'm going to add in an additional 30 to 60 grams based off of my training, okay? So if I am a typical CrossFitter and I go to training 5 days a week and I'm doing the 1 hour class, we all know that in that 1 hour class, we're actually only doing about 30 to 40 minutes of true fitness, right? So I'm going to err on the lower side of my carbohydrate needs, so about 30 grams, right? Okay, that's my starting point. And this is if I am not doing anything else and I have a desk job and, I don't get hardly any steps. So I've got my 100 grams and then I need my 30 minimum for my fitness. Now, if I'm going to be more active or if my training session is longer, I will need more carbohydrates. And if my muscle mass is more and my body fat is less, muscle requires a lot of energy to maintain. So my carbohydrate needs are more. So baseline, these are starting points. This gives you a starting point for your range. Now all of a sudden I've created a range from 100 grams to 130 grams, right? And I still want you getting that extra on your rest days because we're giving that extra to recover from the day before and to plan for the day ahead. After that, we can talk about what your protein and your fat ranges should look like. So your protein is based on your age, your goals, digestion, and activity level. Digestion is directly correlated with age. As we get older, we tend to not digest and use protein as efficiently, so our needs are going to go up a little bit. And then goals, activity level. If you're trying to become a strength athlete and you're in a bulk cycle, right, like we're focused on just getting stronger, I do want you to be having a higher intake of protein. Studies show that when we get too much protein, our default is to actually convert that into lean muscle versus the other two macronutrients, carbs and fat, convert it into dietary fat if we eat in excess. So I never want you to be afraid of protein, and usually it's the one that we struggle the most with getting enough of, right? And then if you're someone who is trying to make body composition changes and you are decreasing your carbohydrate intake, your fat and your protein can go up to adjust for that carb deficit. The cool thing is about protein, amongst other things, is it also can be converted into glucose if your body needs it. So if you eat in excess of it and aren't getting enough carbohydrates, your body, it takes more work, but your body can make glucose from it. And then fat, again, it's based on your age, your carb intake, and where you're at in your menstrual cycle. I often will have my athletes who are menstruating regularly to have more fat in their luteal phase, which is their high hormone phase, or days 15 to 28, because we become a little bit more insulin resistant during that time because of progesterone. So having a little bit more dietary fat, our bodies are better at using fat during that phase, and it helps us keep that blood sugar level so we might not feel as fatigued. And then after that, step 4 are creating, I should have made that slide. Just spread that slide out. Creating your day-to-day ranges. So I used an average woman, a 35-year-old weighing 150 pounds. She's training 60 to 90 minutes of CrossFit 5 times per week. She gets in her steps, so she's relatively active, and she has a normal menstrual cycle. So in her follicular phase, which are days 1 when you start bleeding to days 14, 15 of her cycle, I'm going to have her hitting between 140 to 180 grams of protein a day. And again, I want that range in there because if she goes and has a soul-crushing true 90 minutes of fitness, I need her getting more protein because that protein is needed to repair from what she did during her training session, right? And I also like to give you some flexibility with the low end because sometimes it's just not doable to get in a high amount of protein. If you worked all day, if you had a super busy day, if you weren't able to meal prep the way you want to, et cetera, you might not be able to get that perfect number. And I don't want you worried about perfection. As women, we're so good at constantly trying to strive for perfection. And when in fact, we would do great if we just, had the attitude, C's get degrees, if we just were consistent and hit those minimums. So I don't want you feeling married to you have to be perfect. You can have flexibility. Also, the way we eat and the state we're in when we consume food determines how we digest things. So if you're someone who is consuming 2 whey protein shakes a day and you eat it without any food, any other whole food, your body doesn't have the chance to absorb all of that protein as you drink it. It just flushes right through your digestive tract. So you're tracking those numbers and you're not actually, for every 25 grams of whey protein you're consuming, if you're not eating it with anything else, you might only be getting 10 grams of protein. And you can negate that a lot by eating it with a banana or something whole food to slow down digestion. Things like not chewing your food. If you don't spend the time to really fully chew up that steak, then your body can't access all of those amino acids as easily as if you took, I don't know, 20 bites or something like that. I rush when I eat, full disclosure, but you should be like, at least 10 bites maybe, right? Like 8 to 10 bites so that it's getting into your tummy in a more digested state. So that range also allows you to understand that it's not this perfect science. We're not, these mechanical creatures where we require 3 liters of oil every day and a full tank of gasoline, right? We're not mathematical equations. There are a lot of variables to play with. So recognizing that you can have that range. And then in follicular phase, we do a lot better with higher carbohydrate. We tend to easily use those carbs. So you'll see I gave this athlete 200 to 300 grams. And again, we're basing it off of what she does. Maybe she is already active. Maybe she also goes for a 5-mile walk on one of her days in the afternoon because she's stressed out. Then all of a sudden she's getting 20,000 steps in a day, right? So we take that into account, because she needs more food. And if we're training, we have to make sure that we're stocking up our glycogen stores, which is our storage form of carbs, in our muscles. So we're always making sure that we get adequate carbs. And then her fat, she can be on the lower side. And again, with a range, taking into account things like a ribeye steak, or maybe she's eating more eggs, or maybe she has a high fat cheese. So we give her some flexibility so that she can have more fat if she needs it. And then in luteal phase, we will decrease her fat some, we'll increase her fat some and maybe decrease her carb some based off of what she needs. And then her protein is going to be higher because progesterone impacts muscle synthesis. So we tend to be more catabolic, breaking down muscle in the last 2 weeks of our cycle versus anabolic, which is in our first 2 weeks of our cycle. So we adjust our nutrients based off of our hormones. So again, in luteal phase, progesterone affects muscle synthesis, the making of muscle, and insulin sensitivity, which insulin is the little hormone that gets the carbohydrate or glucose into the cell. And sometimes when the term insulin resistant, the little boat is there and he goes and grabs the glucose and he knocks on the cell wall door and he's like, hey, let me in. The cell's like, I don't hear anybody, because it doesn't recognize that the insulin is knocking. That's insulin resistance in a very, very basic understanding. And that's what happens when a progesterone is up, as our body anticipates implantation of our egg. So we have more fat because our bodies do better with fat during that time. It also controls, if we increase our fat, it slows the rate of absorption of carbohydrates, which allows the boats to go knocking on the cell doors. And this time, for like every 10 knocks, only 1 answers. If only 5 are knocking and 1 answers, right? Now we're doing a better job of answering the door. And if you're on birth control, if you're on hormone-based birth control, you are essentially in luteal or high hormone phase all year round, or however long you're taking birth control, because birth control contains progesterone. And our athletes in perimenopause and menopause, your decreasing estrogen impacts your ability to grow muscle, and again, how insulin sensitive you are, or your insulin resistance, however we want to phrase that. So I would like you to set your minimums even higher. Also, our stomach acid tends to be weaker as we get older, which has a harder time breaking down that protein. And again, we don't have we don't digest it as well. We don't have access to it. So giving your body more gives you a chance to use more. And you can prioritize your carbohydrates. If you're being affected by decreasing estrogen, you take your carbs and you just always prioritize them. Your minimums are making sure that you have them before and after training and in the evening to facilitate recovery and a good night's sleep. And then we play around with your numbers based off of how active you are. Now, your macro ranges allow you flexibility in your needs, and then they let you adjust for hunger. If you're hungry, you eat. That does not mean if you are stressed out, exhausted, and waiting for dinner to cook that you eat a massive bag of chips, right? It just means that if you're coming home and your macros are set to have 60 grams of protein, 50 grams of carbs, and 20 grams of fat, and you look down and you serve yourself this entire plate of food and the macros are higher than what was on the schedule, that's okay. If you're hungry, you eat. And we adjust accordingly because your metabolism needs to fluctuate day to day, right? And that's what this is teaching you, is flexibility in your macros and honoring your hunger cues. Also, luteal phase, you typically need 200 to 300 more calories per day because your metabolism is up, because you're anticipating maybe making a baby. And things like if you have a super, super strenuous activity session, if you crush yourself in the gym, and it's not typical, maybe you do a hero WOD or something like that, you need more calories. I want you to not set your minimums based off of hunger and not decide that I'm not hungry, so I'm not going to eat, because hunger can be affected by so many things. And unfortunately, oftentimes as we gain more muscle, or as we're trying to gain muscle, our hunger is not aligned with our actual needs because of how metabolically expensive or energy demanding muscle is. So you need to decide to eat every 3 to 4 hours. My favorite saying is eat early and eat often, and then have your minimums that you hit no matter what. And I don't want you trying to get it all in at 8 p.m. So if you get to the end of the day and you find that you are super under, try to get in a minimum amount of protein, try to get in some carbohydrates so that you sleep well, and then we'll catch up the next day. And just accept it and then plan better the next day. And then a couple last little things. So exercise is not about fat loss. We train so that we have strong muscles, so that we feel good about ourselves, so that our body compositions align with what we want out of life. And we get that fire going in our training sessions. We fuel those training sessions, and then we have a hot, fast metabolism the rest of the day. Lean muscle, again, requires a lot of energy. So that energy is going to come from food. When we exercise, we get everything going, and then we put in all the food to keep it going, right? Burning the fire hot. You still have to get your veggies in. If you're trying to make body composition changes, one of the easiest ways to make those changes happen is to prioritize a whole foods diet. That's because whole foods take up more space. They require more digestion, which means more energy used. It's easier to control your cravings when you're eating mostly whole foods. You're ensuring that you're filling those nutrient gaps. So oftentimes you can have someone that is overweight but undernourished because they're eating a diet high in processed things, and their bodies are constantly craving specific nutrients. So eating a mostly whole food diet helps with that. If you're an athlete who is fueling for performance, it is okay if more of your diet is processed foods, because those processed foods take up less space, and you don't want to be full all the time, right? Like we're disregarding hunger, but we're not trying to stuff ourselves all the time. So we're trying to find that balance between, okay, I'm not hungry right now, but I should eat. But if I'm super stuffed, I'm not going to want to eat again. So if you're an athlete training for performance, it is okay to shoot for 60 to 70% whole foods and make up that in processed foods, just being mindful of, you're still getting in some higher quality processed foods, like a Perfect bar instead of a Snickers bar. All right, team, that was a long one. That's a lot of information. If you have questions, comments, hit me up. This is my jam. I love helping women fuel for our sport. If you need help with your nutrition specifically, check out the link below. We've got a bunch of different options for nutrition coaching. If you want to become a CFT athlete, there's a link below for that as well. And I hope this helped you navigate how to set your macros and how to be confident with some flexibility day to day.